Welcome to another Rooster Talk. Today we're at the University Club here in Crawley. I've got Andrew Radonjic here with us talking about the announcement that he released yesterday. Andrew, go ahead.
Great to be back, Noel, and beautiful setting here today. Nice weather, but yesterday we put out a announcement about Mount Lindsay, which is, for a long time our flagship asset in the company, and until Riley sort of moved into production over the last couple of years. But look, the tin price is sensational at the moment. A couple of weeks ago they broke the record, went over 33,600, I think it was, US per tonne, which is only 3 times the price of copper. And we sort of, we've got these great exploration targets at Mount Lindsay, and that target along strike to Renison Bell, which is one of the world's highest grade underground mines, and it's been going for 130 years. We're along strike, same geology, got an alluvial tin field sitting there above an EM target, coincidental with a mag target, so all the geochemistry you need. So it's one of our best targets we've had in the company for some time, and we've been waiting, I suppose, maybe for funding to come out of Riley to drill that, but the board's agreed that now's the time to drill these sort of targets while the price is high. So it's a great opportunity, and we've already got a fantastic base from the feasibility studies we've completed back in 2012. So we've got one of the largest undeveloped tin deposits in the world. So we're looking to add to that by making a Renaissance style discovery, if you like, at Mount Lindsay.
Look, when you guys released this, I was very, very interested to have a chat, because I think the story of tin is still sort of underrated. It's still sort of disconnect. There's a big disconnect between where it is and where it could be, or where it already is. And we always think of the supply of tin as tin cans and all that kind of stuff. But I think as we've discussed this in our previous coffee with Samso earlier in the year, the move from the use of tin has gone to EV space, and is a great connector of messages, electrical messages. So that's playing a big part in it. And also the sort of the cleaner tin is much cleaner than sort of the lead, and there's a replacement lead, as you've sort of expressed that. But I think recently I read an article by Wood Mackenzie, and it's really interesting because that 3-letter word ESG has been thrown around on many commodities, not just tin. But it is interesting because there's a lot of supply of tin that sits in that high risk area of ESG. And if that was, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, if that was going to be the case and it's affected by ESG, then you're going to see a lot of supply just suddenly go out of the market.
Well, that's correct. Look, a few years ago, well, maybe 3 years ago, the LME said that from 2022 will not accept tin that's not responsibly sourced. And when you look at that and think about it, then over half the world's tin comes from alluvial operations, which is, so the alluvial operations, they dig up the riverbeds or seabeds, as they do in Indonesia, and process the ore and chuck it back in. So there's no control there at all. There's no rehabilitation, and a lot of the world's tin comes out of countries which are classified as developing countries. So they don't have the systems and the mechanisms in there. So sustainability and governance and environment aren't considered. It's subsistence. They're doing it to make to survive. And unfortunately, these countries, it will take time to get up to the level that Canada and Australia, sort of countries that mine, and because there's permitting in place, we've got to do there's all the rules are there for us to follow. So ESG is very much going to be in our mantra, and all of a sudden the amount of tin, as you said, available to the world reduces dramatically very quickly, and that's already tight now. We can see it at a price, at record prices. Electric vehicles aren't getting built because there's no semiconductors because they don't have tin. That's part of the reason. The other reason, obviously, there's some issues with Taiwan in people and COVID and all that as well, but it's compounded the problem. The stocks, you look at the LME stocks, and there's like 1,000 tonnes sitting there. Yeah, so it's a big issue. It has been a big issue for tin for a while, that it needs a reliable supply, and it needs to be regulated supply. We need regulated and reliable go together, and I think that's kind of where we're heading towards tin. And the fourth industrial revolution is upon us now. It's all about things being the electrification of everything, the technology driven, and to join all those things together, the glue is soldo, which is now 96% tin. Even though still the world it's around about, we did go through that big, the last time we had a huge record price was back in 2011. That was a transition between normal solder, which was 60% tin, 40% lead, to lead 3, which is a 96% tin and 4% silver. So silver's the substitute, and that's much more expensive than tin. So, often we've sat around and at some of these tin conferences, and there's a group of developers group, exploration developers group. We sort of sit down and spoke about tin, and we sort of 10 years ago joked. One guy said, "Oh look, I can see tin going to $100,000." And we sort of went on. That'd be nice because, it was on the back, I suppose, of what nickel did back in the late noughties, if you like, when it hit over 50,000. But the rarity of tin, it's a much smaller market. It's much smaller than nickel. It's the smallest metal traded in the LME. It's only 3 times the size of cobalt and tungsten. And so his statement's not. Even though it sounded ridiculous, it was feasible. And here we are, sort of 10 years on, and we're going, maybe it's more feasible today.
I think going back to that article, he starts the article saying, and I as soon as I read that, I thought of what Rick Rule used to say about lithium and uranium and things like this as well. There's no shortage of tin, right? And he ended the article saying, we could have a lot of this tin, but then we can't touch it, and he was referring back to the whole ESG issue. But going in supply too alone, without all these things that he's talking about, in the last 5 years, there's only all but 1 year where there was a deficit between supply and demand. Not a deficit, I meant. So there is already obviously a shrinkage in normal market. And I think a lot, as we said, right, a lot of this tin is alluvial stuff, and alluvial means you're going to have a bit of environmental issues, and then if you look at hard rock stuff, then you bring up another set of issues, because as we've discussed previously, it is actually a lot of complications involved in getting your tin out of the ground, right? It's not just cassiterite. There's a lot of factors, right? Maybe you could share that with us.
And look, yes, tin. If you look at tin deposits around the world, and let's face it, when from around about the mid '80s until about the late noughties, there was a period of time where nearly 30 years was little or no exploration, because the tin price just fell off a cliff back then, and it's sort of the deposits that sort of popped up around that 2010 period of time were all deposits known about. But each of those deposits, trying to get the metallurgy right is key, because tin can go in many mineral species. It can go into borates, it can go into sulfides, a stannite, which is kind of like a chalcopyrite with a bit of tin in it. So tin is mobile, and so it can get up into other elements. So, like at Mount Lindsay, for example, and I'll compare Renison. Renison is a different style of mineralisation. Mount Lindsay, if you look on a geological map in the announcement, you see it's in the rock adjacent to it. It's not on the fault. But at Renison, it's a massive sulfide, and it's a finer grain tin, and the recoveries are generally the sort of in the high 60s. So narrower, higher grade, lower recovery, deeper, and it's been mined for 130 years as well. That's the history of Renison. So Mount Lindsay, we've got less sulfide, we've got magnetites, a lot of the iron's gone into oxide, and our cassiterite, the tin oxide, which is the if you like, the holy grail of tin. Find it, and it's got to be coarse grain, because if it gets too fine tin's another issue, metallurgical issue. If you can crush it, it slimes. So if you've got coarse grain, which we have, ours is coarser than Renison, it gives you a good recovery. So we get a 90% recovery of our cassiterite, which is only 80% of our tin is in cassiterite. The other 20% sits in a borate called bonsonite, which is
there's a lot of big words here, mate.
Mate, sorry, but that's it's a chemical that requires acid, and it's a different process. So you design your plant for, if you like, maximising the better or the sort of the more dominant tin species in our case. But so there's a lot of metallurgical issues. And a lot of the old deposits in the world, part of the reason they're still in the ground is not only because of price driven, but sometimes because of the metallurgical complexities. And generally you see that the better projects that are going to get off the ground, and at these levels they will, at 30,000 US, is because their recoveries are good. When I mean good, I mean 70%. That's kind of as good as it gets, and that's because of that issue I just spoke about. Tin is not sort of straightforward, and that's why I suppose the alluvial's always been attractive, because you pick up tin oxide going 79% tin. It's a bit like panning gold, but we don't do that anymore, do we?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, look, in where you guys are also, there's, again, it's about geology and what you have, but obviously, I mean, I've looked at your stuff, obviously doing research for this conversation, that you actually only touch a fraction of what you think you have. So I think that's also a good upside in terms of what potentially could be. But at the same time, when we look at tin mines and what they produce per year, I think we spoke, there was about 100,000 tonnes used per year, which is not a big number in terms of volume. So you actually don't, and obviously the commodity price is high, so you're not needing to produce a lot to make a lot of money.
No, well, these prices said 3 times the price of copper. You don't need to produce a lot of it. So look, I think the way we approached Mount Lindsay, and got to remember we spent $35 million on this asset. But when we first got the asset, I was going back looking at the announcements and going, we actually got interested because of the magnetite, because the magnetite was worth something back in 2007. Yeah, it was. And you got, if you look at Mount Lindsay, it's got a bit of Savage River, Australia's only magnetite mine, which is making some serious cash at the moment. We've got a bit of Renison, we've got a bit of King Island, a bit of scheelite sort of mixed in there. So, and very fortunate, the elements adjacent to each other, but not mixed amongst each other. So they separate very well in the process flow sheet we did in the feasibility study. But we just went up there and we just drilled under the holes that Aberforth had drilled in the 70s, and Renison had drilled a little bit in the early 80s. So we just kept on drilling down plunge. We started looking. We had one zone was richer in magnetite at the surface, and then we drilled. What was our hole 70? It was already 64 holes before we got there, so it was 17,000 metres of diamond core already in the hole, in the deposit, and we got big lumps of scheelite sitting in a magnetite skarn, and that's worth some serious money. It's a big coarse pieces, and we got in the presentation I got 12 metres at 1.7% tungsten trioxide, which is twice the grade of King Island. And then we drilled a deeper hole in the main skarn, and we got 28 metres at 2.5% tin, which is, if I told you 28 metres at 7.5% copper, everyone would go, whoa, but that's a fantastic intersection, and we started drilling those holes, and we found what we call the McDonald chute. It's about 120 metres down. It's kind of like the guys just stopped drilling, and then it petered out, pinched out, and it came back again, and we drilled the next hole, and that was hole 102, etc. So the process happened. So all of our focus was on those zones, drilling that out, and we didn't do much exploration until quite late in the piece, and then we found the reward discovery. There's a nice little deposit of 400,000 tonnes at just under 0.9% tin, so that's quite healthy. So that's sitting in the Livingston area, and then that was Big Wilson, 17 metres at 2% tin. We just got one intersection there in 2012. I was asking my exploration manager, when's the last time we drilled? It was January 2013. We did some follow-up holes there, and we sort of the tin started getting a bit wobbly in terms of price, so we sort of backed off a little bit, and so we did nothing in terms. Started doing a bit of surface geochemistry, and we started developing new targets. We started doing exploration during the lull in the commodity cycle, and it's not until now we've actually been able to afford to go back and drill it. But that's what got us involved drilling now was the EM survey we did in 2019, which is not long after we did the EM survey on our Southwest project tour, which Charles and I JV'd into, looking for a Julimar lookalike. But we were so impressed with airborne EM there, we trialled it for the very first time we'd flown at Mount Lindsay, and we got 50 EM targets. And the great thing about it is that Renison use EM to mostly downhole EM because it's a kilometre down, but they use EM to find their massive sulphide. So on the Renison position, on that Federal Bassett fault, the same fault, we've got an EM anomaly sitting there under an alluvial tin field with a coincidental mag anomaly. So it's just tick, tick, tick. But we've got a whole bunch of other EM anomalies, which we've got to go and test. And when you look at Mount Lindsay, the EM response is moderate. It's nothing exciting about it. So there's a whole bunch of EM targets. So we've added that EM geophysics. We've added that to the soil work we've done over the area, and all of a sudden, like I said, we've tested 10% of our targets. And the idea is that we've got 8 years mine life from our first. We call it stage one, and then we find a Renison or find another Mount Lindsay, and like every other mine on the west coast of Tasmania, you start with 10 years. You don't like the analogy is Kalgoorlie. You don't find 70 million ounces on day one. You build it over time, and that's why Renison's got over 200 and it's probably over 500,000 tonnes endowment of tin, and still growing. But that's taken 130 years to get to that point. So, we think Mount Lindsay is a multi-decade opportunity for the company, and there's a lot of great mines on the west coast of Tasmania. It's a great geology. It is world-class area for tin and tungsten deposits, as demonstrated by King Island on the tungsten and by Renison Bell on the tin.
I think that's a good thing about where you guys are in terms of geology. But I think people should remember that this whole commodity sort of run or rerun, and it's the next super cycle compared to what in the 2007 or 5, took a lot of years to develop. It didn't just happen in the last 12 months. We have been talking about deficit of nickel, copper, and all this, and everyone's been saying, look, the critical metals is being ignored and all this. But that conversation has been 4 years, 5 years in the making, and just now is when people are starting to see this jump. So everyone's thinking, it's just an overnight thing, but it's not. It's had a lot of foundation built into it, and this next rise is the next EV revolution. So there's a shift, in my opinion. There's a shift in how we used to use these metals to what we are going to use, and I think the market's suddenly saying, hey, there is a deficit. Hey, we're using. Suddenly they're realizing they're using more tin or using more copper or whatever, and that's driving a lot of this next growth. As long as we're not going, if we see any big major spikes, we're going to see some coming back of that pricing. But I think the long-term growth is a long, shallow drive, because we are now going to be building the next life of transportation, and it's going to be EV life. And a lot of these critical metals like tungsten is a forgotten one, but if you look at what the properties of tungstens are, it's actually what we will be using more and more as we go forward, right? Because we want lighter, cheaper, smaller, stronger, and as we've discussed before, tungsten follows tin traditionally. It'd be very interesting to see, this next run, how tungsten runs. If that follows, and you guys are sitting on a nice little package there.
We've got we're very blessed to have, obviously that Renison style target is more tin, a bit less tungsten. There's a little bit of tungsten at Renison, not much. And then we've got that sort of some other targets which we've got. So we've got a bit of a mixture of tin, tungsten, and just pure tin type targets. But we're building a circuit to handle both anyway. So we're going to have a plant which is going to have feed over many years from many targets. But yeah, just getting onto tungsten, just very briefly, it's critical mineral. It's on Australia's list. It's on everyone's list.
Yeah.
Tin, by the way, was sort of the cut-off was at 24, and tin was at number 25. So they just missed out. Tin's usually on the critical minerals list for all the other countries. So, but it's unique. Its property is it's second hardest to diamond. It's same density as gold. And it's in all the drill bits. It's hard wearing plates. It's usually when steel production goes up, tungsten goes up as well, so that's quite an interesting. But the thing about it, it's always a key. And a lot of the mines around Kalgoorlie, they started digging up veins of scheelite in the Second World War because it's military applications. And it's always been called strategic before it was called critical. It's because it's armor plating, armor piercing bullets, armor plating. So anything to do with strength, tungsten is your natural friend, and China controls it like a rare earth. They kind of bundle tungsten like a rare earth, and the U.S. government, and this is not just Prime Minister President Trump, but John McCain before that, saying that we need to source our product from not from North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, etc. We want to source it from other countries, and when you look at that, you got to and again, you taking ESG into account, you go to Canada, you go to Australia. Those are the sort of jurisdictions where that America can acquire these products, or Europe can acquire this. So the dependency on China producing this, they want to minimise that. Japan likewise, with Japan and China don't get on super well. A lot of history there, but they'd rather get the product from Australia, and hence, we're in a pretty unique position with our project at Mount Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, look, fantastic. Looking forward to getting the results. I mean, how long do you think that drilling will take?
Well, the drilling, we were able to get drill rig reasonably easy in Tasmania. It's not like Western Australia. The drilling activity is not as aggressive as it is here, and generally it's sort of much less. But we were able to get the drill rig quite easily, but it'll be only day shift only, so it'll take reasonably deep holes. So it's probably to be at least 4 to 5, 6 weeks drilling probably, and then we'll go into the assay lab, which is obviously a bit of a bone of contention, trying to get assays, but trying to get the right. And again, we spoke about tin, its complexities. You've got to get the right methodology, and otherwise you undercall your tin because 4-acid dye just doesn't work. So, it's going to take a little bit of time. I suppose the key thing for us is visual confirmation of cassiterite, or even massive sulfide. I think will be a big tick, because if you can get, when you look at the core at Renison, when I went to Renison, I didn't see cassiterite. I saw massive sulfide because it's finer grained. At Mount Lindsay, when you get to really, we've got zones going 14% tin, and you just see lumps. There's a sugary, sort of glassy crystal, sort of sometimes a brown tinge if it's got a bit of iron in it, or black, sort of blackish tinge, and that's your cassiterite. It's unspectacular, but we've got our eye in terms of if we start seeing cassiterite, we can report that to the market, and those are sort of the indications that sort of say we're onto something that is either a tin deposit or another Renison lookalike. Hopefully that would come sooner. Hopefully we'll be hearing something about that, if not in June, then July.
Okay, look, it's fantastic. It's a good update. I think the tin space is going to get bigger and bigger and more talked about, in my opinion. I think it's just the beginning, but. Look, Andrew, thanks for the update, and we hope to hear more.
Pleasure as always.
All right, cheers.